afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. This session would be titled as Cultural Diplomacy. As our guests, we have Mr. Christopher Merrill, Ms. Judith Kevin, and our moderator would be Shayma Saiyid. Ms. Shayma Saiyid is an artist, a dancer, and a choreographer. I would handle over the session to her. Just to let you know, the format of this session would be, since it's 1 hour, 45 minutes would be the discussion that this guest would be having. The last 15 minutes would be the question and answer session. We would appreciate if you can ask your questions in a short and concise manner and refrain from making any statements. Thank you.
So we're here with Judith Raven and Christopher Merrill to talk about US cultural diplomacy. Christopher Merrill has published 6 collections of poetry, including an award-winning one, many edited volumes and books of translations, 5 works of non-fiction, among them Only the Nails Remain, Scenes from the Balkan Wars, and Things of the Hidden God Journey to the Holy Mountain. His latest prose book, The Tree of the Doves, Ceremony, Expedition, War, chronicles travels in Malaysia, China, and Mongolia, and the Middle East. His writings have been translated into 25 languages. Journalism appears widely. Honors include Chevalier from the French government. As director of the Iowa Writing Program, he's conducted cultural diplomacy missions in over 40 countries. He serves on the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO, and in 2012, Obama appointed him to the National Council of Humanities. Judith Raven is a cultural attaché, public affairs section of the U.S. Embassy, Islamabad, Pakistan. She works with U.S. Educational Foundation in Pakistan and on overall cultural grants management, among other things. She's arrived in Pakistan for a 2-year assignment in September 2013. Before Pakistan, she was press attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo. From 2008 to 2010, she was public affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum. And from 2006 to 2008, press attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Yaoundé, Cameroon. She has also worked as a press officer at the Bureau of African Affairs in Washington. And from 2003 to 2005 as vice consul at the U.S. Consulate General. Oh, really?
Can you bring it closer?
Is this? Is this better now? Judith joined the State Department as a Foreign Service officer in 2003. She speaks Spanish, French, Italian, Japanese, and Russian. Before joining the State Department in 2003, she lived in Tokyo, where she was Spanish-English translator for the Embassy of Peru, a freelance editor for Kodansha International, and news rewriter for Fuji TV. Between extended stays in Tokyo and Buenos Aires, Judith worked for the Ouagadougou-based Journal de Jeudi as a journalist, and for the Pan-African Film and TV Festival of Ouagadougou as a translator and editor. She's the author of Ballet in the Cane Fields, Vignettes from a Dominican Wanderlog, published last year. Editorial production team member of Traditional Tutti, Khartoum, published in Khartoum in 2010. On-site researcher, writer for the Mali chapter of the special 2000 edition of West Africa, The Rough Guide, and editor of the travel guide series La Guia Pirelli Argentina, 95, and La Guia Pirelli Uruguay, 96. Judith has an MA in Romance, Languages and Literatures from Harvard and a BA in Spanish from Brandeis. She did undergrad work in language, literature, and history at universities in France and in Spain. So I'm very honored to have the opportunity to talk to these people. Cultural diplomacy, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction, just drawing on what Christopher Merrill has written for the State Department, and also adding just a few things in there. So cultural diplomacy is defined as the exchange of ideas, information, art, and other aspects of culture among nations and their peoples in order to foster mutual understanding. This is just Christopher's words. When our nation is at war, every tool in the diplomatic kit bag is employed, including the promotion of cultural activities. So with the end of the Cold War, US government culture programming was slashed. Between 93 and 2002, budgets fell by nearly 30%, staff was cut by 30% overseas, 20% in the US, and dozens of cultural centers, libraries, etc. were closed. In 99, the US Information Agency, which was the biggest public relations agency in the world, was closed down in 99 because the Cold War has ended. And the staff was dispersed. The USIA had been founded in 1953, which is the same year that the US conducted its first CIA-backed regime change in the world, which was when they overthrew Mossadegh in a coup. The abolishment of the USIA in 99 marked the end of a formal cultural diplomacy policy. So anyway, what remains now, this is what Christopher wrote, right after 9/11, and so we're going to now talk to them, fast forward to now, to tell us where we are at now. Pakistan is one of the biggest beneficiaries. Judith sent me these numbers, and Judith, I'm going to ask you to start with, do you want to give the numbers, the overall, and tell us about the Pakistan?
I think I want to start with an anecdote, okay? So way before I joined the Department of State, let's say late 90s, I had an experience in West Africa, a very remote area. I think it was just mentioned that I was a travel guide writer in Mali, and I had to get from one point to another where there was no fixed route. The only way was to hope. So after waiting for 6 hours to get across one desert area to another, out of nowhere, like a mirage, came a truck with about 16 people on it. I was going to be the 17th, because it was the only way to get where I was going. And on the back of the truck, like covered in dust, I found a decal of Madonna. This was like 10 years after Madonna was even popular, and she had made it to this parched, remote area of West Africa, and that was before something like cultural diplomacy was even in my vocabulary. So I think what I learned then was that culture reaches places that, individuals cannot always reach with ease. And so if we talk about what cultural diplomacy is, before we get to the numbers, it's the heart. Cultural diplomacy reaches very deep, and it's very long-lasting, and it's very impressionable. And I think we saw it last night with the Kathak dancing. I think it was mesmerizing, and it transcends language, and it transcends cultural barriers. So now when we translate that into figures, because of the relationship between Pakistan and the US, which is very, very important, very strategic, we actually have the largest exchange program for the US government in all of the world in Pakistan, and that's over $40 million worth of exchange programs. So I'll leave that there for now. But really, cultural programming is this. It's all of you here because you believe in culture.
Christopher, it was really fascinating to read some of the recommendations you wrote in your report. For example, one of them was about, you mentioned that the public-private partnerships was, I'm just trying to get at what were the new changes in the new cultural diplomacy after 9/11. I think there was an element of public-private partnerships that was new. There's also more of an emphasis on exchange programs rather than just sending the US. So can you tell us a little bit about what were your recommendations? It's an emphasis on translations, which you've done a lot of, and if you can talk about your own experience.
Well, I might start in a similar vein to Judith, because I began as a young poet a very long time ago, and at the start of my writing life, I became friends with the Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali. He was living in the United States. He'd moved to the United States. We spoke on the phone every day for 20 years until he passed away. And his influence on my writing life was absolutely decisive. Among the things that Shahid did was to challenge American poets to write, as he said, real ghazals in English, to take a form integral to the literary tradition here, and especially as practiced in his translations of Fez Ahmed Fez's poems, and encourage American writers to try their hand at that. That's a form of cultural diplomacy. What writers learn always is that there are no borders. We become friends with the Kashmiri poet and our work changes. So that's at the heart of what I do as a writer. To pick up on what we were talking about in the cultural diplomacy report, after 9/11, there was a widespread questioning in the United States. We said, why do they hate us? And that was one of the things that you heard in all kinds of foreign policy circles. One of the issues was that we had essentially dismantled our cultural diplomacy program at the federal level. And so I was tasked with trying to do some research and to write a report about what cultural diplomacy might look like in the 21st century. And we go back to the root idea, which is people-to-people exchanges. Shahid and I talking over the phone, telling jokes, gossiping, reading the beginnings of new poems to one another. And in fact, that's really what we do in many cultural diplomacy programs. And what we were encouraging was more of that. I run the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, and every fall we bring 30 to 40 well-known writers from around the world. We've had a lot of great Pakistani writers recently, H.M. Naqvi, Shandana Minhas, who won the Best Fiction Prize last night, Bina Shah, and they find themselves in conversation with writers from around the world. We tell our writers, come write as much as you can, engage in a robust conversation with people who might be viewed in other circumstances as your enemy, and see if there isn't some kind of common ground. So among the recommendations were more money for more cultural exchange programs, which Judith can tell more about, but they include bringing students to Pakistan, bringing American scholars and writers, bringing students to America, Pakistani students to America, American writers, scholars, and artists to Pakistan, and seeing what we can't learn from one another.
Judith, you mentioned this program called the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation. This is one of your landmark programs in the world, I think, and also in Pakistan. And if you could say a little bit about it. Also, you did say that in Pakistan, that the program applies not just to tangible heritage, but also to intangible, like dance or drama, craft, specific knowledge about weaving things. In Pakistan, it's focused on renovating renovating historic buildings. But I was curious about whether you send a call out to proposals about that. Can people apply for this funding, or are you planning on expanding it to intangible areas? Or I guess the need is so vast for the buildings that maybe you don't have the funds to go in the intangible direction.
Let me, first by a show of hands, who has heard of the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation? I'll raise my hand, I know about it. Who else? Okay, so there we go, someone in the back does. Okay, so this is a global drive to preserve cultural heritage throughout the world. Pakistan has been particularly fortunate because we now have 18 projects in Pakistan. This is after 2001. And because it carries the ambassador's imprimatur on it in every country where we operate, it's globally competitive. It has to be sent to Washington, approved by the Congress. But our ambassadors over time have preferred tangible, let's say tangible property, but it can be anywhere in the world. Preservation of a dying language, an alphabet, a folk dance, musical tradition. And the latest one for Sindh province, you should certainly know, is in Makli Hills. So that was over $260,000 invested in the preservation of 2 ancient tombs. And we know that it's also a site protected by UNESCO, but it's the hugest necropolis. And so any additional funding that can take care of other specific tasks in that necropolis. So that we're very, very proud of, because that was the first Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation in Sindh. And we hope this, because it should be nationwide. So anyway, so Taxila, we've done a lot of work at Taxila. We've done a lot of work in Lahore, in the Walled City, Nazir Khan Mosque, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and There's really no reason why it could be tangible or intangible. It's just perhaps because Pakistan does have some amazing, huge monuments, and the need is so critical to preserve them, because at some point there's like an emergency restoration process that needs to happen, or they will be lost forever or damaged forever. And so we've concentrated on that.
And I could say that a writer we had in our program from Malaysia, Eden Koo, has a wonderful little nonprofit called Pusaka, determined to preserve the shadow puppetry, Mind Putri, the bird dance, all the different kinds of intangible heritage in northern Malaysia. And he's been documenting it, he's made films about it, he's been training young artists to do that kind of work. So it does, the idea is to be creative and figure out what possibilities are out there and what needs should be met.
Yes, I believe that has to do with the Malaysia, the sort of the traditions dying out of the minority.
Exactly.
The majority is Muslim.
I would just like to show you. So this book, which is available at our booth in the courtyard, and we also have a handful of copies here, this is the amazing cultural heritage of Pakistan, which we just, collaborate with federal and provincial governments to make sure that that's restored for humanity. And this copy can be for whomever what wishes.
Yes, please visit the booth and get your, there's so many programs, so much to learn about things that one could apply for. I wanted to ask, Christopher, you mentioned about the bringing people together, and I heard you mention in one of your interviews that you brought a Palestinian and an Israeli person together and they became good friends during the course of your workshop. And this is actually a critique of cultural diplomacy. I was just reading can't remember his name, this Indian American who's written a book about this, that there's too much focus on cultural diplomacy. There's a lot of talk about cultural diplomacy, about friendship and all, which is of course very important. But that it's often done to the exclusion of policy, because policy changes. It's not just an ideological fight between. The war is not just ideological. There are some important policy issues that need to be addressed, like the Israel-Palestinian dispute people do need to stop encroaching on the settler movement, has to be put an end to. So do you feel that there's too much focus on cultural diplomacy to the exclusion of talk about, because it's not just about good Muslims versus bad Muslims, it's also some policy issues?
Well, if you were to look at the relative amounts of money devoted to cultural diplomacy, you would not say that there's too much emphasis on cultural diplomacy.
I see. Okay.
It's a very small part of the budget, and in fact, as an artist, we're down in the trenches. We're not involved in policy decisions. What we're involved in is bringing writers together to see what kinds of sparks might be created between them. And I'm just thinking, one year we had an Israeli writer and a Palestinian, and the Palestinian was delayed in getting to Iowa by visa issues. And I was driving the Israeli writer to an event, and I said, so how are you and Mahmoud getting on? And she said, he screamed at me for an hour and a half, and now we're good. And at the end of the residency, all the writers, the gods are speaking. All the writers were traveling, and there was a problem with Mahmoud's hotel reservation, and he ended up staying on her couch. And I thought, this is kind of what happens. They realized they disagreed completely on the policy issue, completely. That's part of it. But on the human level, they became friends, and that's what artists are about. I think the policymakers are in another pay grade.
And I think there's no microphone. I think, yeah.
I don't know if this is working.
I don't think this is working. No sound? Yeah, no, there's no acoustics. We can use our voices, but the microphone's definitely. Well, while the acoustical issue is being resolved. So for the U.S. government, we definitely do align our policy issues with public diplomacy, And so, for instance, very important for us is women's empowerment and entrepreneurship, which are two things that speak about our society and values. So we integrate, we weave. Back? No. No luck. Is it just mine? It's just mine. Can I tell another story?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a very unexpected story. We brought an American chef to Pakistan a short while ago in June. And while we were planning her arrival, of course, we had many conversations about Pakistan and what she needs. And look, it's the mango season, good for you, but it's very, very hot, bad for you. And so she had a lot of questions. And in the course of this conversation, we asked her, I mean, is there do you know anything about Pakistan, right? Because you never want to insult someone, you want to build on their knowledge. And guess what she said? She's in her maybe 50s, 60s. She said, well, I really don't know much about Pakistan, but when I was about 6, there was a Fulbright scholar in my house. And that's the only thing I ever knew about Pakistan. And that's actually the reason why I wanted to come back. So when you talk about long-term effects of cultural diplomacy, I think that's great. So of course, what we tried to do was locate this person, a Mr. Qureshi, of which there are many in Pakistan. And he was in Karachi, of which there are also many in Karachi. So we finally found his son, and it was a really poignant, I don't want to say end, because just continuation, that this generation, you know, meeting one another when she was little, and that was the only window into Pakistan she has, and of course it was very positive.
It was, you had mentioned that Pakistan has the largest Fulbright program in the whole world, 19 million or so, 200, an allocation of 200. But I noticed not always 200 go, sometimes less than 200 go. Is that because you don't get enough applications?
This is the best question you could ask, because Fulbright is actually now open. It was just this weekend, it was launched, 2016 Fulbright. So this is something you can disseminate, and I have the deadline, and then I'll really answer your question. So the deadline is in May, the middle of May. We'd like to get representation from all over Pakistan. That's no microphone. No microphone. Oh, back. That's very, very, very important. We don't put a quota on it because it has to be merit-based. We have to evaluate all the incoming applications. It's like very interesting. But it's all about flexibility. The person cannot just possess amazing intellect. They really must be able to connect with foreign publics, because Fulbright, like all of our exchange programs, are two-way. So last year, I think it was 183. In any case, let's say a little over 180, and we expect about 150 this year to travel on the next program. But they are our cultural ambassadors, because people, through them, will begin to see Pakistan through a different prism. And equally important, when they come back to Pakistan, people will begin to see the U.S. through the experiences that they recount. So on both ways, it breaks stereotypes. So no, we're not really fixing it at a mark. We would like to get the best people, the best representatives of Pakistan, because they will go out and they will be people's reference point.
In our program, in our program, we have writers coming from around the world. The Pakistani writers read not only in Iowa City, where they have the chance to meet pretty much all the great writers in America, but then they speak at universities and colleges around the country. They visit other places, and at every stop, they are talking about their work, their literary tradition, and their country. It's a great way for Americans to get educated by the writers who come to visit.
So the actual statistic for Pakistan is that the U.S. government invests the greatest amount of money in Fulbright Pakistan. So congratulations, actually.
And South Asia, Pakistan is number 3 as far as the number of students in the U.S. So number 1 is India with 92,000, and this is numbers you gave me. Then Nepal, and then 9,000 and 5,000 for Pakistan.
Okay, so we We hope to do better with your help. We think studying in the United States is an amazing experience because we have over 4,000. When we say colleges, they're of university levels, let's just say over 4,000 universities in the United States from which to choose. And with over 180 million people in Pakistan, there are only just under 5,000 Pakistani students studying in the United States. You're behind Nepal, which has a very small population and yet has almost 9,000 students. So education in the United States is really three things. It's about quality, it's about flexibility, and it's about career enhancement. And so we spend a lot of time through our implementing partner, our collaborative partner, which is U.S. Educational Foundation in Pakistan. They also have representation in Karachi, trying to help students for free educational advising, figure out what is best for them. Because I think one thing that's unique about education in the United States is it takes a lot of responsibility on the part of the student to make those decisions. And that responsibility begins with where do you want to study and what do you want to study and how, because there's so many choices.
Just to put those numbers into perspective, at my university, we have 30,000 students, 2,600 of them come from China. The number of Pakistanis at my university, considerably lower.
But after meeting Christopher Merrill today, maybe that will change.
Christopher, you were talking about this very interesting new program, I think, for students between 16 and 19, Behind the Lions or something?
Between the Lines,
Between the
yeah.
Lines.
Well, all these years we've been bringing distinguished older writers into our program, and starting about 6 years ago, we expanded that to include a 2-week summer camp. And first, the idea was to bring together Arabic writers and American writers. And then we built on that and brought together Russian writers and American writers. And this summer, we will bring together Turkish, Armenian, and American writers. And next summer, we're having a special session of Between the Lines called the Silk Road, and it will bring together Indian, Pakistani, Afghan writers from all along the countries that were once part of the Silk Road. And the idea, again, is our emphasis is on writing. So we have workshops in the afternoon let's say in Between the Lines for the Arabic students. They have workshops in Arabic. In the morning, they're together with the American students reading texts together. American texts one day, Arabic texts the next day in translation for the Americans. And the idea is to have a cultural exchange, but also to come away with some larger idea of what it means to be a writer.
Now, regarding cultural exchange, I wanted to just touch briefly on the 1956 tour by the jazz company, the big 18-member jazz band that first they went to Iran in 56, so this was 3 years after the coup. And then they came to Pakistan, and they were very popular. And Pakistani film music has been influenced, Wahid Murad, our first, Coco Corina, Mere Khayalon Mein Aayi Hai Ek Surat Matwali Si. So you can see a lot of jazz influence. They're wearing those dresses and the bow ties and all. And but what was interesting about that was that these mixed black and white bands were touring all over the world, whereas at home there were the Jim Crow laws in place at the time. But the cultural diplomacy imperatives of the time pushed these artists out to sort of spread a message which wasn't really true about America. But that led to these people speaking out about Louis Armstrong used to speak out about racism when he was on his tours, and it led to social change within the US. And I think this is also a nice opportunity now because you have a lot of promotion of Muslims, and I think eventually I think it is going to lead to positive change as well. What do you think about this?
Well,
of course, it wasn't enough. I mean, there was a lot more.
I would like to think that our cultural diplomacy exemplifies the best of what we are as a people. And the fact is that every country falls short of its ideals. Every country has the possibility to self-correct. And we have a long history of self-correction, and that's embodied in the civil rights movement. So if those jazz musicians were in the advance guard of that, that's great. And we hope that as the programs develop over the years that we continue to that. For an example, we did a program last fall. We brought a blind American poet, a choreographer, and a composer to China, because one of the policy initiatives has to do with the disabled community. And what we wanted to do was to run a creative writing workshop, a choreography workshop, and a musical composition workshop. And I cannot tell you how beautiful it was to watch the disabled dancers dancing with professional dancers, because in fact, they were every bit as graceful, the disabled were every bit as graceful as the professionals. Now, this is also a movement that has taken on life in the United States, but it's not widely accepted. But at its best, we promote an ideal that we hope will lead to a better understanding of what it means to be human.
So since we're speaking about musical diplomacy, this is a road that was well traveled and took a long time to realize. But this year in March, for the first time at the largest music festival in the United States, which is called South by Southwest, there will be a Pakistani showcase with 6 bands. There will be Harun, Mikal Hassan Band, Mai Dai, Sain Tanvir Brothers, Rich Boy, and Kumarian. So that, got nice spectrum. So what began a long time ago still continues in many ways. We have the Rhythm Road, we have Center Stage, which brings bands from all over the world to the States for a 6-week tour. They mostly go to college towns and such. But again, music travels very far and very wide, and so we still use it. Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed with respect to the artist exchange with Pakistan, by the way, it would be great that Karachi Literature Festival Facebook page posted a video of this Juilliard trained dancer who didn't have any legs. And this was quite some time back, and it would be wonderful if, they have dance programming here every year. If maybe one year we could have somebody like her, it would raise disability awareness as well as respect for dance. And I don't know if any other country has a disabled dancer from a school like Juilliard. Wanted to ask about the exchange with Pakistan. A lot of male dancers are going. I don't think there's enough male groups of qawwals and folk musicians who are male. It seems to be quite male dominated, the artist exchange with Pakistan. I don't think the US Embassy seems to be making an effort to have more women artists in the exchange program.
So this is a question for me, not you. And actually, it's our mandate, gender parity. It's our mandate. So we must do that in the Fulbright program, and we must do that in our alumni program, which is over 14,000 people. And the new executive committee, which began, it's nationwide, it began, I think, in 2003, and there were 3 women, and now it's like 30%. So that's pretty good. It takes society to assist us. It takes all of civil society to give us their best people, but there are programs that we've denied funding for or postponed funding for until they had more of a gender balance rather than a gender imbalance. So no, we are mandated by Congress to pay very close attention to that.
And I think it is good because in Fulbright, I believe it's 40% women, 60% men.
I think it was about 51% last year.
Really, yeah. But we don't see that in the artist exchange as much. But yeah, certainly in academia.
When I arrived at the International Writing Program, we always had more men than women. And that was explained to me because it was more difficult for women to get away. But I can say that in the last several years, we have almost always had more women than men. And that's, it just takes making a conscious decision, and then such changes can take place.
Well, one thing I thought I would bring up, because but it's probably not in the scope of this discussion. There were the hip-hop dancers in the hip hop singers in Cuba and that whole thing with the USAID chief having to resign. I was wondering whether there's a component of your funding. There probably is. I mean, the biggest recipient of US aid is the Pakistan government and the Pakistan military, and yet there's doesn't seem to be as much objection to that as there is objection to the, NGOs. NGOs have come under a lot of suspicion, and sometimes they get bombed. And I think part of it has to do with this transparency, because the Pakistan government, everyone knows how much money they're getting, everyone knows who they're getting it from. But and in Cuba as well, it was because probably these musicians were just singing what they would have sung anyway. But because it was hidden, they came under this this kind of, they had to leave the country. So I wonder if they should. What do you think about having more transparency in a country like Pakistan? Because I believe they're changing the laws so that now USAID is not allowed to do undercover work in hostile countries. Pakistan is not a hostile country, so I assume undercover work continues. But I wonder whether maybe it's not helpful for that. Because NGOs really have sort of come under suspicion, even though Pakistan government gets more money than they do.
So I can't speak on behalf of USAID because I'm U.S. Department of State, but I am a public affairs officer. So that word public has a very huge weight. And so, for instance, when we put out funding opportunities in terms of our internal transparency, again, to not to speak more of us, we have a review committee. We take notes. We have criteria that we're obligated to put out there on a public website, and we do our best to adhere to those ethics. I think it does a disservice to do it in any other way.
Now, we just have about 5 minutes or so before we'll open it up, or 7 minutes. And I'm wondering what would you like to talk about? Do you want to do a run through, or Christopher, do you want to talk about because you do a lot of traveling, and you were mentioning in Syria you had workshops, so with different people, or if you like, we could go run through of the programs, whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say we've had, in the last 7-8 years, we've had the great good fortune to be able to take terrific American writers out on the road, and I'm just remembering a day that we worked in Somali refugee camps in Dadaab on the Kenya-Somali border. I had 4 writers, and we were meeting with this group of young writers, by young, 18 to 30. And then there was a Q&A, and somebody asked, so what do you have to offer to us? What can you give us? They were used to getting a certain kind of Western aid. And one of the writers said, we're writers. We can barely tie our shoes. And that stunned everybody in the audience. And the whole dynamics changed. Because the fact is, we weren't coming and making promises. We were coming to share our passion for the written word, for creative activity, for curiosity. So that went on. We had 3-4 days of programming. And on the last day, we probably met with about 300 kids altogether. On the last day, 3 young men came in, and they came in a little late. And again, so they raised their hand at one point, and they said something like, what's in this for me? I could be at home studying for one of the non-existent places in the Kenyan university system. And so I said something about intellectual curiosity, creative process, this stuff. But I had the feeling I had not really connected with them. So I felt not so great. We finished the session, and we went to go visit the newest section of this refugee camp, which at that time had about 280,000 people in it. And we got out of our car, and it was very tense. And people swarmed around us, and one of the elders came up and started basically yelling at us. And I was smart enough to know that I should just let him yell and not argue. And when he was done arguing, then he wanted to recite one of his poems. I thought, oh, okay. So things calmed down, and we walked along, and these 3 guys were with us. And we met a woman, and she was talking about her 2 kids who were they were suffering from eye disease because of malnutrition. And she wondered what I could do. And I said, well, the only thing I can do is I'm a writer. I can try to write about this. And these three young men who were translating for me, one of them turned to me and he said, well, you know, we could write about this. And I said, you know, I was thinking, bingo. And I said, you know, I've been here 3 days. I don't know anything. You've been here 18 years. You know this story, okay? And then we parted. So we had a chance a year later to follow up, and we sent some more people back there. And in that year, what these guys had done, they'd created a newspaper. They had a film production studio going on. They were on fire. They were making things happen. They were telling the story of their lives in that camp. And all that we gave them were a couple of intellectual tools and maybe some encouragement. But it seems to me that at its best, that's what cultural diplomacy does.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to just talk about a few things about cultural diplomacy also. So since we spoke about Fulbright, which is one of our flagship programs, Senator Fulbright, because the name comes from him, talked about turning nations into people. And I think that's what cultural diplomacy does. And there are a couple other reference points in cultural diplomacy. So another, Edward R. Murrow, who here at journalist, you may have heard about Edward R. Murrow. He's a very renowned journalist, and he was the director of the U.S. Information Agency, which was known abroad as U.S. Information Service, USIS. And he talked about international exchange as bridging that gap, about the last 3 feet. So like the distance between one person and another having a conversation. And ultimately, now with social media, that conversation can be thousands of miles, ultimately bridging the last 3 feet. But it does bring the virtual and physical worlds together, and the ability to have dialogue over whatever the subject is and whatever your perspectives. And the people who have participated on exchange programs always use this word. They always say it was life-changing. I myself am a product of cultural exchange, educational exchange. But it's life-changing, and they become really active citizens. They have enhanced confidence. They have an openness toward the world. They really give back to their community. I think as global citizens, they make excellent candidates. So, you know, like poetry is the great equalizer, I think cultural diplomacy is a great equalizer.
Yeah, sure. We can open up to questions.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think, and also the fact the arts, I think, is always good, no matter what the motivation. It's just always leads to improvement of society.
Thank you. This was really great. I think my question is about, I'm also a Fulbright scholar. Shall I stand up? What happened to that part, like from US to Pakistan? Thank you.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. We send over 1,200 people to the United States every year on long-term and short-term programs, and we do not have as much the luxury in Pakistan as we wish we had, which is that it were to be more of a two-way street. So since we do have Fulbright scholars and specialists and speakers and American chefs and artists, et cetera, who come here, but we don't get the same amount. So that's why it's not 50% in both directions. And we hope one day that corrects itself, because that is how Fulbright is designed. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
But you have 34 exchange programs.
We have over 34, but in terms of Fulbright, which around the world is that way, of sending and receiving, and we just send more than we receive, although we do receive Fulbright scholars.
Thank you. The exchange programs that you mentioned including the Fulbright program, which is the largest. Basically, only those who can read or write English can access those programs. And whether it's the US or British Council or Goethe Institute, they all reach out to only those who can understand English. In Pakistan, there is a huge divide, language divide, and the vast bulk of population don't understand English. When US or Germany or England, you concentrate on these programs, you're only addressing one section of the population and not reaching out to the vast majority of the population. And so your program's effectiveness is very limited.
You have the English access,
Yeah, if I may answer so. So when we were talking about South by Southwest, for instance, sir, the Pakistani showcase, one of the artists is Maidai, who's never been out of Pakistan in her life, does not speak English, and actually will require a translator on hand for the entirety of her time. So we do this, and in Pakistan we have something called the English Access Micro Scholarship Program. For short, let's just call it the Access Program. And why it's called Access is because we see that in Pakistan, English is like the glass ceiling, right? You don't really get to university unless you can speak English. And so this reaches out to disadvantaged populations very specifically. Ages 14 to 18 is an after-school program. This year we trained more than 5,000 students in English, and it gives them, and I'm sorry I don't remember the time frame, but I think it's 6 weeks. It gives them for an extended period of time intensive English training, and it's really for that very purpose, to level the playing field a bit. But we do have programs for which they're called single country programs. So if a group of people go to the United States and they don't have that capacity, then there'll be an interpreter assigned to it, to that group, factored into the budget. Because of course, if it's a group of Urdu language journalists, there's going to be an interpreter there because we also want them to have that experience. I can't speak for any other country, but that's what we do in the United States.
This is off the subject, but I just wanted to ask, is Mr. Merrill, are your books on sale here today? Can we buy something of your poetry?
I'm sorry to say that they're not, but they are available on Amazon.com.
Where are they available?
Amazon.
Amazon. Okay, thank you very much.
Can you pass this, please? This isn't. Hi. So I had a question. One of the things that really struck me in the U.S. was how immigrant populations that have settled, Arabs, Pakistanis, they never refer to themselves as, they call themselves Arab Americans. Identity is a very fluid thing, and it tends to become so for us, for those of us who also travel on exchange programs. And I was wondering, you've already got a population and a substantial, big one in the U.S. Since we're talking about cultural diplomacy, are there programs that reach out to the diasporas and to the already settled populations to sort of, work with them? I mean, I'm just thinking, just a few months ago, Marvel Comics, a Pakistani American just, she turned out this awesome comic book character, Miss Marvel, who was Pakistani American, and a lot of people over here really enjoyed that. And I was wondering if you sort of promote more cultural output like that.
I can answer just in terms of my program, with the writers who come, we're always encouraging them to reach out to the diaspora communities. And just as you were saying that, I was thinking of the Chinese novelist Yu Hua, who he kind of got in the Chinese diaspora pipeline, and I had to keep extending his visa because he kept going to university after university. And that's, for us, that's the gold standard of how it works. But I'm sure Judith can talk on a more systematic level.
So yes, I think this microphone doesn't work. So yes, the diaspora community is an excellent resource because, thank you, because that's okay, I think. Too many microphones. Sure. This okay? Yeah. So because they bridge two cultures, or in many cases, there's also regional culture, so multiple cultures. There was a group of Pakistani American doctors who came on a humanitarian mission for the first time. Last year, they came to Islamabad, and we absolutely received them. That was self-funded, but we made sure the ambassador was there receiving them because it's a wonderful initiative. And some of them, you know, they're sons and daughters of Pakistanis, so they were born, let's say, in the United States, had never been to Pakistan and were cautious about the trip and came and had a wonderful experience. And so this year, a larger group came back and they went to Lahore. Diaspora is a great, great asset. Yes, is really the simple answer.
Hello. There is enough talk about Fulbright program. I just wanted to have some more information. What are the levels? Is it available for postdoc and doc? And what are the breakdown of the candidates? And some critical and more essential element of being a successful candidate for that.
Perfect. Okay. So again, so Fulbright was launched 2016. Candidates were that was launched this weekend, and the deadline is May 13th, 2015. It's for masters and PhD, and it's fully funded, and we work with the government of Pakistan to determine what are their priorities. So there are priority fields, but it is actually open to all disciplines with two exceptions. One is clinical medicine, and the other is a PhD in business administration. Other than that, on the following website, which is www.usefpakistan.org, you can find the full list of the eligibility criteria. So that would be the best, www.usefpakistan.org. Mm-hmm.
Any other question? Yeah. Okay, another question of the same thing. Hi, is there any possibility that, for instance, if I'm in journalism or a field in social sciences, then why the GRE thing is over there and it's like quantitative part that you have to attempt as well? That scares me, like
Okay,
truly scares me.
Let me ask a question. Did you take the GRE?
I did, and I didn't do very well on it.
I took the GRE. So
Okay.
these requirements are across the board, whether you're a foreign student or a U.S. student. Yeah,
That is
it's-
acceptable, that is fine, and that has to be there. But then if you are applying for a program like journalism or something in social sciences, then why the mathematics part is given importance in there, like quantitative? If at the first place I was so good in mathematics, I would opt for something in business administration or something of that sort, probably engineering.
I can say that when I was applying for graduate school in English and creative writing, why I had to take a math part of it was beyond me. So,
But just one quick question. Are you applying for Fulbright or studying the U.S.? What?
Fulbright, I'm planning to apply for the Fulbright, but again, GRE.
Okay, so there are standard tests that must be taken. The rest is up to you. That application should be as rich as you feel your experience and you are as a candidate. And there's a lot of room. It's a very lengthy application for you to showcase who you are. So
Definitely it's
emphasize
there,
that.
but just one thing, that you guys give weightage to the quantitative part or not, if relevant to the program, considering it's relevant to the program or not.
We give priority to the person.
That
the
is
full
good.
person.
Okay. Thank you.
One last question. Can we take this one?
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then can we maybe one in the back, because it's not always fair, front.
Yeah. While I can see that you have some very good cultural exchange programs like Fulbright and others, maybe not. I am not aware of if there's something exists. I was wondering if there can be a program which can take some seniors, not in that term in senior citizens with a sufficiently high experience within this country, because there are people who have been in corporate world, entrepreneurs. They understand the society very well, and they can really communicate to the intellectual questions outside the world as well. So if those people can go, and maybe they can disseminate whatever their concept of this society is, and they can actually explain the differences, and maybe they can correct some of the concept in that part of the world.
No, thank you. I mean, we try to get people with a long career track ahead of them so that they can really take advantage of this for as much time as possible. But there's the Humphrey program, for instance, requires 5 years of experience in your field of expertise. So that's someone who has a level of professional development. And something called a voluntary visitor program, where we've sent people in their fields, we gather them together. It's sort of cost sharing because maybe their company or the government pays part, but then all of the domestic travel and all of the contacts in the United States and getting them to where they can really get access to information that will help them come back and do whatever they do. So it's a little bit of a balance, maybe slight imbalance, but that's the logic. We would like them to be mentors for as many people as possible for as long as possible after. Can we make sure to get the question in the back?
Thank you. Often there are some political priorities behind the cultural diplomacies. So following the US troops pull out from Afghanistan, do you foresee a scale down in your cultural activities or a scale up?
So for instance, I've lost track of the months, but it was maybe 7 months ago. We had Dr. Marvin Weinbaum here, who's an expert specifically on that topic, Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. And he spoke based on his own research and knowledge, and he's a very distinguished academic in the field. What can I say? We try to choose the best programs, the things that will inform people or create a debate that's constructive and productive. And in his case, it did. He met with some he met with university audiences, he met with think tanks, to try for his analysis or to share Pakistani's analysis of that situation. Mm-hmm.
I can say I've made 2 trips to Afghanistan, and I'm making another one next month. So we're still trying to do what we can on the cultural diplomacy.
No, but what I can speak about is there's also something called the University Partnerships Program. So right now, that's over $17 million invested in pairings of Pakistani and US universities in the social sciences and the humanities. And so we have 4 in Sindh. One pairs the University of Karachi with George Mason University. The other pairs Indus Valley University with Southern Polytechnic State University. The other pairs NAPA, National Academy of Performing Arts, with University of Texas at Austin. And the other has slipped my mind, ISRA University. ISRA University has a pairing for the moment, I can't remember. But this is nationwide, and the 2 newest ones, which are seeking their university partners, their US partners, is National College of Arts in Lahore in Film and Television, and the other is University of Punjab in Sociology and Social Development. So anyway, these are all ways to just connect campuses across the United States and across Pakistan. And one of those is a consortium of 5 universities in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with the University of Kentucky in Business Administration. If not, please visit our booth. We have information on free resources for teachers and students of English. It's at the booth in the courtyard. And we have these books which document the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation projects in Pakistan. And we also have information about, in English and in Urdu, it's called Khabar-o-Nazar. It's a monthly publication. The latest one is on trade. And social media, we're there available whenever. That's the thing about social media, 24 hours a day. And so thank you for your interest. I'm not sure if Christopher has parting words.
Well, I see my friend Shandana Minhas in the back, so I would just say make sure you go out and buy her book, Survival Tips for Lunatics.
And thank you. And thank you to Shayma, and thank you to the Karachi Literature Festival, and thanks to my colleagues at the U.S. Consulate General in Karachi, and thank you.
Thanks to another cultural diplomacy effort is this Karachi Literature Festival, which is supported by the Cultural Diplomacy Fund.
Thank you everyone for attending this session.